Well, I'll read you another poem that is new. You're the first people to hear this, for better or for worse. My father teaches me to bat. Now, my dad, to his credit, was always trying to help his two daughters be athletic. He just failed miserably on both counts. We were not, but he was out there every Sunday morning, every Sunday afternoon, doing something with us in that really awful grass. I look at the grass in Leewood where I live, and I think of that grass of that farmhouse. I don't think they ever watered it. I know they never watered it. They never fertilized it. It looked like trash. My father teaches me to bat. I miss a pitch and my father frowns. I'm 9, 10 maybe, an August afternoon. He and I standing in the backyard grass. On another planet, World War II lumbers near some village even my father can't pronounce. No matter. I'm entrenched on this dour lawn, in the shadow of my mother's house, surrounded by fields that smell like toads. Under an Arkansas sky boiled dumb by the heat, I miss another pitch. I could just see it in my father's face. Well, what do you expect out of a girl? This is a brand new piece I've written for the memoir. I've actually started another chapter about my father, and this is called Rice. It's 1940, a late August afternoon. I'm 5 years old, playing hopscotch in the backyard of my parents' house. The day is punishingly hot. I'm in my favorite shorts and sandals adjacent to the yard as one of my father's rice fields, ready for harvest. The field I see every day from my second-story room. Bob, the hired hand who, my father says, hasn't got the brains God gave a white goose, has bundled the grain cart into the field and gone home to supper. He's forgotten to close the gate. My dog Skippy, a black and white rat terrier, who wouldn't know a rat from a raccoon, moseys toward the field. He looks back, inviting me. I hesitate. This field of rice is higher than my head and goes on, it seems, into town, maybe even across the river to Little Rock. Dad's issued me strict warning about this. When a field of rice has grown to mature height, as tall as my 6-foot father's breast pocket, I am not under any circumstances to enter. I hear Dad's voice in my head now. You get in that field of rice when it's grown, it'll swallow you up. We'll never find you. Whistling Mersey-dotes and dozy-dotes, I follow Skippy into the field. My mother's house, my swing set, my sandbox dwindle behind me. I enter a black forest of rice. Its odor a mix of drying hay and baked pie crust. The crickets have begun their singing that years later I'll come to associate with graves. I push on, following Skippy's lead. A red-winged blackbird balances on a rice stalk, bending it almost to the ground, offering a four-note kunkaree, kunkaree. The blackbird flies away. In the silence, the rice closes its ranks around me. I've lost sight of Skippy in the dusk. Above, ahead, beside, behind me is nothing but rice stalks, each one a clone of the other, impersonal and banal. I feel the breathing on my arm. A rustle, a message in code, speeds like brush fire through the grain, each head bent and listening. The last of daylight wavers. There's a sliver of a moon. I'm drowning. I want my mother. I want my room. Something, a snake perhaps, nudges my foot. My heart rattles up past my collarbone. Joe Amel? Someone's calling from a great distance using both my given names, a sure sign of trouble. Answer me. You answer me right now. You hear? It's Daddy. And although I don't want to be left in the coming dark, abandoned to this lockstep army of rice, I want even less to face my father. I say nothing. Skippy, having circled back to me, says nothing. Dad calls again, harsher, closer. Answer me, young lady. Then I see just above the rice stalks a straw fedora skimming along, no visible body or face beneath it. My father looms like Colossus in front of me. In Vacation Bible School, I've seen a picture of the sea parted by Moses. Dad's face is even darker than that. You turn around right now, he says, and you head for home. I hear the relief in his voice, but I feel the willow switch on my bare legs. Little stinging swipes every step of the 3 or 4 decades it takes to get to my mother's house. Didn't I tell you? And you went in that field anyway? Don't you ever, he says, punctuating every other word with a switch. The air has cooled. The rice has grown aloof, bereft now of crickets and blackbirds and light. Tail down, Skippy tucks in beside me, headed home. Some things you really don't forget. I'm not sure what kind of effect that had on my character, but I don't much like to get enclosed in places now. Well, just to sum up a little bit, the problems that a poet runs into in writing a memoir, also the pluses. Poets are given to not so much the facts of the matter, but how those facts feel. There are all kinds of memoirs. You can pick up one written by a journalist and you're going to get a lot of interesting facts. Pick up one written by a fiction writer and you'll get great characters. But usually with a memoir written by a poet, you will, at least I hope, get the feeling of what it's like to have experienced that. Language, of course, poets deal in figurative language, and that is what you want also in narrative prose. My problem is to keep that pulled down to a more conversational level, because I find it wafting off into poetry if I'm not careful. Now, a lot of people ask, well, did it really happen that way? Is that really the truth? And especially since you all know, you've heard about the run-in that James Frey, who wrote A Million Little Pieces, had in with Oprah and run in with Oprah about that. And she claimed that after she endorsed it, but she did not know that he wasn't completely telling the truth. So there's a lot of debate right now. But as my husband Charles says, if it didn't happen that way, it should have. So I think that's pretty much a writer's prerogative. There are 2 things I've learned in writing this memoir. One is that the singular, most formative experience of my life was learning how to pull that chicken's head off with my foot. As hard as it was, though, I don't think it was as hard as finishing this memoir is probably going to be. You can go home again, I've also learned. but only for a visit. You can resurrect and recreate the dead and the lost, but in the end, they go back where they came from. And it's probably just as well. I'll close with, I hope, this poem called Summer. Every summer when I was a child, I visited my grandmother's farm. We didn't say much to each other, listening to voices, the far bark of a dog. From somewhere thundered the easy complaint of the porch swing. When it rains, quickening old ashes in the fireplace, I want to go back to the house that was, the people that were, the chores, the horses, the cat. But what if I could? What if someone, glancing up from a sewing machine or a plow, should see me there? Thank you. Well, maybe I will finish it after all, so and then you'll have to suffer through some more chapters. I think we have time, don't we, Jeannie, for some questions?
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to ask me, I probably can't answer, but I will try. Are any of you writing a memoir? Oh, come on, confess, I bet you're not. Keeping a journal?
Yes.
Yes, which might one day become a memoir. It's fun, yeah.
I am not writing one,
Okay.
but
Good for you, lucky you.
yeah, but I retired recently, and hearing you suggests to me maybe I ought to think about it. And I guess my question to you is, what is it that got you to do this? I mean, had you been thinking about doing this for a long time, or what? Maybe you said that at the beginning, but I had a heck of a time finding this place since I live in town, and this is a way far away, and
Well,
I
there's
got
several
lost.
libraries, aren't there?
I'm sorry about that.
Did you hear the question? The question was what made me decide to write the memoir? My father's death and settling the estate, going through all those things up in my mother's attic. And you just can't imagine unless you've had pack-rat parents. Truly, they never threw anything away except unmentionable things. That's about it. Because my father and mother both said, well, I might need it someday. But you've got to remember they were products of the Depression, the Big Depression, the 1929. My father and mother got married in 1934, and in Arkansas, we were still right in the thick of it. And I have letters where they're reassuring each other that they can make a go of it. They can make some money, enough to live. But that's what really got me going. And just, you know, and I'm going through all that stuff, and I'm thinking, I thought I knew my mother. I thought I knew my father. I thought I knew my grandparents. But I didn't. There's their skillets, and their blouses, and their school papers, and who were they? And who am I? So I'm just writing it to try to figure out, at this late stage in my life, who I am. That's a good question. Sometimes I wonder why I'm writing it. Donna, you had...
Yeah, I'm curious about the process you're using in terms of what stories you choose to tell, and also how in your mind you've structured this.
Oh, that's the hard thing, the structures. You know, I don't think I'll ever commit a novel. It's, you have my utmost admiration. You are a novelist, because it is the structure that is the hardest. And how do you choose from those thousands and thousands and thousands of things that you remember? Okay, the question was, what's the process and how do you structure it? my process is, I decided to keep my sanity, if I have any left, that I would write it in chapters. And if I could break it down into chapters, that I could maybe get it done. And I mainly just want to write it as a good story. I want all of these things that I write to be good stories, that people will want to turn the page and find out more. And so the process is dividing it into chapters. The structure is, I don't know how many drafts I've already been through, many, at least 5, 6, countless outlines, but I do have an outline, and then I know pretty much where it's headed. And then I have an outline for each chapter, because each chapter encompasses throwbacks, flashbacks. I lost my train of thought. I was going to tell you something else, but I can't remember it. Right, it'll drive you crazy. Don't start one.
So it's not necessarily in chronological order, you go flashback and so.
No, I think as every writer knows, you're taking facts, yes, but you must make art out of it. Otherwise, it's just going to be a diary. And chronological order, I think, would kill it. You're not writing an autobiography, which in my case would be terribly dull anyway. You're writing how the experiences of your life feel, and trying to put the reader into that time and place. And I guess the other thing that got me started writing this, you asked that, was that I don't know anybody else who's written about a rice farm in Arkansas. Now, John Grissom has written about a cotton farm, but that's a whole different world. It's a different culture. Of course, by the time I get this done, there'll probably be 3 or 4 out there about rice farms. But did I answer the question?
The setting is going to be very important.
The setting,
where
yeah.
everything comes together.
Well, yes, the setting is mostly on that farm. I do go into the problems that my sister and I had in settling the estate, but that's confined to one chapter. The focus, I decided early on I'd have to focus on just one part of my life. And so I go from 5 to 15, and it's sort of a cutoff. Those formative years. And I also realized in writing this how terribly important everything we do and say is to our children and our grandchildren. They soak up everything. I only saw each set of grandparents twice a year, but they had tremendous input into my life. Because I started going there when I was 5, and I could go now if the houses were still there and point to every picture on the wall and everything in the cabinets. Unfortunately, all that's gone. It's just in my mind now.
Is the house still there?
The farmhouse I grew up in is still there, but it belongs to my sister. And I will never, therefore, get to go in it again because we're estranged. The house that my grandparents on my father's side came to me in the settlement, I did sell it very, very reluctantly. I suspect it is swallowed up by a condominium which was next to it on Lake Hamilton, near Hot Springs. My mother's parents' house is, I'm sure, long gone. The truth is, I don't want to go back. I don't want to see that they're not there, because I almost know they're not there. And when we go, Charles and I go down to Arkansas, and occasionally we'll drive down the dirt road past my house, and it sets back off the road with some trees. And something just kills me inside that I'll never go in there again. But I'm trying to get over that because those were happy years mostly. And you can't keep everything forever anyway, only in your memory. And I think that may account for the popularity of memoirs, that there's so many memoirs on the market. Have you noticed? Everybody's writing one. But it's because, I think it's because people want to be put into a certain time and place that's not theirs. But then they start thinking about their own. I think that's the way it was. Yeah.
I wanted to mention that this fall at the Writers' Place, there's a series of classes on on Saturdays about how to write memoir, how to approach these issues. People might be interested.
Okay, and they can find that on the Writers' Place web, which is www.writersplace.org. Also, I'm hoping that we get a man who I think is the best memoirist in America, Hilary Masters, who is the grandson of the famous Edgar Lee Masters, who wrote Spoon River Anthology. But Hilary chose to go the fiction and nonfiction route. That's written a book, a memoir called Last Stands. If you're at all interested in memoir, you should get that. It's the gold standard. It's absolutely beautiful, and most of it's set, a lot of it's set in Kansas City because he lived much of his life here in Kansas City with his beloved grandparents on his mother's side. Well, any other questions? You might want to ask Charles something about how it is to live with a yeah, on second thought, don't ask him, he'll tell you.
How, as a memoirist, do you deal with, or are you dealing with, talking about the weaknesses of the people you love while being fair to their power? How are you finding your guidelines there? Exploring the whole truth, but showing how you love these people.
Well, that's an excellent question, and it is a problem. Fortunately, they're all dead. Because I can tell you, if I published this while my mother and father were alive, even though most of what I say is quite favorable, they would not like it. I would not, well, why didn't you put this in? It's the same thing, you know, when I started writing poetry and I showed my mother a published poem. Jesus Christ. Mother, I got some published. Oh, it's nice, honey, but it doesn't rhyme. And then my dad, bless his heart, he was such a taskmaster. I had to be not only an A student, but an A+ student in school. And if I came home with all A's, he would say, that's fine, but they ought to be A+. I mean, you know, so he would, well, it just wouldn't be right. No, but of course, you know, every story has to have conflict. And so even though I had a happy childhood, there was conflict. There was a lot of conflict with my mother and father over many things. I overheard some pretty strong arguments. Moving to town was probably the least of them. That will go in there because people like to read about conflict, and they would not believe me anyway if I painted a picture of perfect parents. Who has perfect parents?
My children.
Of course. Well, Dallas, they live in Kansas City. I can find them. But yeah, you want to be fair. Now, the controversy that came out over the James Fry, A Million Little Pieces, was over the fact that he was writing about drug addiction, and it came out that he falsified some things in order, I think, to make things more interesting. He claimed to have spent 3 months in prison when he actually spent about a day. He claimed some other things. I haven't read the memoir, so I'm going to back off from much opinion, but But you've got to remember when you're picking up a memoir, if it's well written, it's going to be a piece of art. It's not going to be a photographic chronological summary. It's going to be how it is seen through the eyes of the writer. And that's how, to answer your question, Donna, and you know this because you're a playwright, you organize it through your eyes. What's important to you, and you hope it's important.
And how many months were you in prison?
Well, there's some things you don't divulge. But every good Southern story has to have alcoholic, a crazy, and somebody in prison, and a train. I haven't yet got the train worked in. But I can do that. And I hope it has universal appeal. I hope that even though it's set in the South, that it will strike a chord in someone who lives in Mankato or Kansas City. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you eat chicken today?
Well, I did eat chicken for a long, long time, and that chicken whose head I took off ended up on the supper table, and it was delicious. My mother learned how to fry chicken in the womb. It was fabulous. I don't eat any meat now, as I'm a vegan, but it's not so much because of that experience, but just because I've decided it's the best way for me to go. But frankly, pulling a chicken's head off has just knowing I could do that, has gotten me through almost every bad circumstance in my life. I say, okay, you do. Remember, if you could do that, you can do this. So I thank my mother for that. Bless our parents. Faulty as they were and are, they did some great things. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming. It's been fun. Fun listening to your questions.